All right. I think we're live. We're going to wait just a couple of minutes, give some people the opportunity to join. Hope everyone is doing well. My name is John Baker. I'm based out of upstate Western New York, kind of in the Rochester region. So we're getting our first glimpse of sunlight in maybe 3 weeks. It's just been perpetual snowfall. I'm joined by Rachel. Rachel, I wonder if you could say hello to everyone, let them know where you're based out of.
Yeah. Hey guys, some of you might recognize me. I'm Rachel McDonald. I am a CSM here at Torii, so I'm just jumping on the webinar to help John out a little bit. I'm actually based in Richmond, Virginia, and it is all of like 65 degrees and sunny today, so it's very nice.
Okay, that's not fair. So we at least it's above freezing here, so I'm pretty happy about that. Yeah, so just wondering for those of you who are in the audience, we've got a good number that have joined now. If you want to enter into the chat, just let us know where you are based out of. Unless it's too nice of a location, then I don't want to hear about it, if I'm just being honest. Yeah. And so Rachel, that was very kind of you to reference it as helping me out instead of bailing me out. So I do appreciate that. Yeah. All right. So I guess we'll just kind of get things going here. Welcome, everyone. Today, we're going to be talking all about discovery. This webinar, it's called Find Every App, a practical guide to SaaS and AI discovery. Now, the early versions of this webinar, we were going to talk primarily about, how to discover all the applications in your SaaS ecosystem. But kind of as we worked on the material for this, we talked to a lot of professionals in the industry, and we found that what a lot of people really wanted to talk about was not just about that discovery, but what do you do with apps once you've found them? And specifically, how should we be thinking about AI apps as well? So that's what we're going to be talking about a little bit today. Just a couple of quick housekeeping items. For an optimal connection, we definitely recommend that you use the computer audio in place of a telephone connection. All your microphones are automatically set on mute to limit the background noise. And throughout the course of this webinar, if you have any questions, we definitely encourage you to ask those through the QA section at the bottom of the screen. Now, like I said, my name is John Baker. I'm the Senior Manager of Content and Digital Strategy here today. And I am fortunate to be joined by Rachel McDonald, who is the Senior Enterprise Customer Success Manager here at Torii. Rachel, you want to introduce yourself once again?
Yeah, yeah. So again, I'm Rachel McDonald. So some of you may know me, but I have been on the CS team here at Torii for gosh, I think like going on 3 years, maybe a little more now. So I've been here for quite a while. So I know a lot of the ins and outs of Torii. So that's kind of why I'm here on the webinar is to help kind of explain some things that you guys, if you're current Torii customers, that you can do today to improve kind of your monitoring of, shadow IT, especially around those AI apps. And for anything that we mentioned today that you may have questions about that we're not able to respond to on the webinar, please don't hesitate to reach out to your CSM. They're all aware of what we're talking about today, so they're ready to help you out whenever you guys need.
Yeah, absolutely. And to Brian specifically in the chat, I feel you there with better than it was, but not 65. Same here. All right, so I guess at this point, I wanted to ask another question to the audience, and this is just kind of get a feel for where everyone is at. As we're going to be talking about Shadow IT and AI in particular, I'm wondering if people could just answer in the chat, how confident are you in your current processes as it relates to Shadow AI? You can say something like, it's low, we're not feeling very confident, or maybe it's a little bit higher. If you can give us some insight what you're feeling in the chat. Seeing low, lowish, things of that nature. And I get it. There's a lot of conversation, we'll say, that needs to happen around that. Now, one thing that we recently did here as Torii is we did the SaaS benchmark report where we looked at aggregated data for SaaS ecosystems and we looked at what was the rate of growth for applications in these ecosystems. What was the adoption rate looking like? And the data was really interesting to me, at least, because I know that there's this old narrative that we had, kind of the slow ramp up of SaaS adoption. And then the pandemic hit and it hit a spike, and then it kind of leveled off and slowed down. But what we've actually seen in the last year is that that faucet, metaphorical faucet, so to speak, has really been cranked wide open again. When we look at these groups and we categorize them based on the size of the organization, we found that for 4 out of the 5 groups, on average, they saw an increase in the number of apps of about 20%. And I know that was really shocking for myself in particular. Rachel, I know you're dealing with, IT professionals on a daily basis. Is this the kind of stuff that you're seeing out there?
Yeah, for sure. I think what's been super interesting is, I know we all saw the huge SaaS explosion during the pandemic and after the pandemic and all that good stuff. And then, I think we saw like a little bit of a plateau while people were kind of figuring out where things go and who's using what and all that good stuff. But now with, AI being introduced to the market, I think that that has just kind of reinvigorated kind of all of these new applications being created and obviously released. And thus your teams may find them and check them out, attempt to use them. So we've definitely seen an uptick in the number of apps that are being discovered by Torii, and also the number of AI apps, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned there with the AI apps. So when I saw those numbers, first thing I did was dig in and I was looking for patterns about this explosion of applications. Because if you think about it, outside of AI, there's not a lot happening out there. And so I wanted to know what were these shadow IT apps. And so we specifically looked at applications that were categorized as still being shadow IT or were left in a discovered state within the ecosystem. Which apps appeared most frequently in that state? And we found overwhelmingly the majority were relatively small AI applications. Whereas in the past, when we did this report a year ago, those shadow IT apps were things like Notion Calendar, Expedia, Product Hunt, kind of known applications that were often just, they're known and they're off to the side. But what we saw was an explosion of smaller AI powered apps, often with teams of 10 to 25 employees that were viral across these SaaS ecosystems. There's also some recent research from Gartner about the importance of kind of getting a handle, having centralized visibility into that SaaS ecosystem, and how that's going to be critical for mitigating cyber attacks going into the future. And so it made us kind of think critically about the differences when we're talking about shadow IT versus shadow AI. What are the similarities and what are the differences? Because we don't want to arbitrarily create, FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt around AI just because it's AI. But we do want to know, how should we be thinking about these differently versus the same? So we have this little graphic here with this Venn diagram. And typically with Shadow IT, what we've seen traditionally is that they're often a standalone or a suite of products. They often do store or have access to company data. And they typically follow along this kind of subscription model based on the number of users. But Shadow AI, there's some nuance, some differences there, where often they are standalone products, but they could also be embedded features or add-ons. Another significant difference is that as opposed to just having access to or being able to store data, it is something that often trains on or reuses companies' data. And maybe more troublesome is that there's an incentive for the users to aggressively pour their data into these models, where a lot of times you only really get value out of that AI app if you give it a lot of data. And so that can open up a lot of risk in relation to security, in relation to personally identifiable information that maybe wasn't there before. And something that's starting to emerge from a cost perspective is that as a lot of these these generative AI tools, there is real energy consumption on the back end. And so we are seeing kind of a shift in pricing models away from that conventional subscription model and maybe over to more of a consumption-based pricing, which a lot of organizations are not as well prepared to handle. Now, Rachel, I know we were talking the other day, and you were talking about kind of a trend that you're seeing with IT maybe taking a little bit more control. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. So I think what's been interesting that I've been seeing in the field as I've been working with my customers, is there's a couple of things that we're seeing. So there's definitely a shift around AI. So I think, up until a few months ago, we were seeing all of these small AI apps kind of popping up. And so teams were utilizing them and checking them out, see how it could make them more productive. But I think what has since changed is that we're starting to obviously see some of these bigger, more larger organizationally managed apps like a Salesforce utilize AI and launch new features that leverage AI. And so, across all of our customers and the different organizations and that different kind of policy and governance, some customers where it's like, okay, well, if it's just a couple of apps here and there, we don't need to worry too much about it as long as we're not, it's not training on our data. But now that these AI components and features are being released in those apps that folks are using every single day, it's kind of forcing the hand of our teams to get more involved in the management of those applications. And every organization is different. But another trend that we're seeing is because of some of the increase in the capabilities and the technology, specifically around AI in a couple of areas, we're also seeing a trend of kind of IT wrapping their arms around those apps that maybe were managed by another team. So again, sticking with that Salesforce example, maybe the sales team managed Salesforce. But with the release of these new features, we're seeing kind of a regathering and control and some more governance happening. So it's definitely interesting to see the trends. And I encourage you guys to reach out to your CSMs and ask them about what they're seeing in the field and how you might be able to replicate some of those processes that we're seeing. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just going to add on a little bit to that because it is a tough, I don't want to say misalignment of incentives, but there are different incentives there where you'll have, for example, if you're in the marketing team, you're concerned with MQLs, driving leads, getting all of those things. And so you're just looking at what are the tools that help me do the thing well versus if you're IT or if you're InfoSec, you're saying, well, when you're adding in all these apps, you're adding in vulnerabilities, and they're not as much focused on what those outcomes are. They're looking at the possible liabilities. Is this adding data exposure, things of that nature? And when you have that AI, kind of like you're talking about, it sometimes is a little bit of a wake-up call of like, oh man, this is magnifying the risks, magnifying that exposure area. And so it's tough. There's this balancing act that needs to happen between the outcomes of a lot of these apps versus the risks associated with it. And I think that's going to be a recurring theme with this webinar is that the actions that you decide to take are going to be dependent on the culture of your organization. And different organizations are going to make different decisions. And it's not about which one is right or wrong, but it's about which one is appropriate based on the context in which you're in. So yeah, definitely agree with all of that. So now we're going to jump over a little bit more and start talking about the tactics. Now, in this, I want to make it very clear that we are offering up examples of what we are doing here at Torii, of how we're approaching this, how we're thinking about this. But like I said, this is not a silver bullet. We don't have a perfect solution. We're doing the best we can to react to these things, just like you all are. But this is a shifting landscape. And so hopefully through this, you'll find things that are useful to you. You'll find maybe some tactics, some tips, some ways of thinking about this that you can apply to your situation. And the first place we just have to start with this is discovery. I recently wrote a piece looking at full app discovery without the use of a SaaS management platform because I wanted to understand what are the tools that people are using in order to conduct, full discovery without the use of a SaaS management platform. And there's a lot of different tools out there. There's a lot of different options. You can see, this was from direct conversations as well as combing Reddit threads and figuring out what solutions do people turn to. And you'd see things like network monitoring, identity access, CASB, unified endpoint management tools, all the way down to really manual processes such as combing through expense data line by line, conducting employee surveys. And all of these options are a way to get some insight, but they all suffer the same shortcomings. You'd hear the same frustrations. And it was this idea that that data was often incomplete. It was very quickly out of date, and it was really time consuming to maintain. And I think the reality is that without kind of a designated tool, this becomes a full-time job. Um, and so that's why, here at Torii, we definitely believe that it all starts with discovery. You can't secure what you can't see. You can't manage what you can't see. You can't optimize what you can't see. And so for those of you, I don't want this to just become a commercial for Torii, but the reality is that you can't actually do a lot of these things unless you have that real-time discovery running. So for those of you who are not sure, I want to encourage you to just test out a 14-day free trial of Torii, and you get unlimited access to our discovery engine. So you can just use that as a way to figure out whether or not this is a solution that could work for you. And Rachel, I know you've talked a little bit with people who are kind of on that fence and they weren't sure, and then they actually tried out Torii. Maybe you want to talk about that?
Yeah, for sure. I think what's fun for me is I'm kind of on that the side of things where I get to kind of survey and watch the process happen as we onboard new customers to Torii. And a quick example I can give is recently I was onboarding a new customer and they turned on a few integrations and they had a spreadsheet that they were using to manage their SaaS apps prior to Torii. And they thought they had around somewhere between 175 and 200 applications. And upon kind of quote unquote turning on Torii, they discovered over 600 applications.
Yeah.
So I think there's just so much out there that our teams that are not using Torii or an SMP in general are unaware of. And as you mentioned, John, obviously those different tools give us those application records and so we can see things, but they don't have a system kind of bringing together all of those records and doing that very efficient and discovery to show kind of what's out there and what's in your environment.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the key here is that we want the people out there to be able to operate strategically and not get stuck doing a ton of that manual work. We want them to be able to orchestrate actions. And, it's all about having the right tools at your disposal. And so now I'm going to kind of transition. We're going to talk about specifically how we handle shadow IT at Torii. After you have that initial discovery, but then what do you do? And so this is a bit of a framework that I kind of came up using, looking at the principles that we apply. I wanted to come up with a super catchy acrostic acronym. It's either an acronym or an acrostic. I wanted something catchy, and I came up with RIPACMA. So not my best work, but it still encapsulates all of the things that I kind of wanted to point out about when we are dealing with shadow IT, shadow AI. It has to be something where there's real-time detection. You engage with cross-functional teams, you prioritize risks, and that's going to be something that comes up a lot because I think that prioritization is maybe one of the big obstacles here. You have to actually take the action. You need to take advantage of continuous improvement. See where you can. We've redone and improved our workflows time and time again because we're always learning. And then alongside that, you also need to centralize your data. You need to have maintained records, and you need to be able to align your team so you're all moving in the same direction. Now, when we're looking at this, this isn't about a series of steps so much as a number of core elements that you can reuse and configure in different directions. When do you bring in different teams? How do you do that prioritization? That's up to you. But these things are all key ingredients to actually getting to that, quote unquote, promised land of getting your SaaS under control. Now, Rachel, I'm curious. I know you're helping IT professionals on a daily basis. Which one of these do you think maybe trips people up more than others?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think, the one that sticks out to me and just in terms of what I'm hearing and seeing in the field is really around centralizing the data. I think, in certain organizations, again, there's disparate teams, disparate systems, systems that can do different things, systems that can do the same thing. So there's lots of different tools we have, as you guys all know. And I think what I've seen in the field anyway is this interest coming from infosec teams and maybe folks that weren't already involved in Torii, an interest in what Torii has and what Torii can do. And I've been on a few calls with these teams where they are logging into Torii and we're kind of walking through, and these infosec folks are saying, "Oh my gosh, I didn't know that Torii had all this stuff. This is great data. We have some of this data in, another tool, but we didn't know that we had it here as well." So I think the moral of that story is even if you think you know what your other technical teams are doing or using, it's definitely worthwhile having a quick conversation of, hey, we have this system that can help us in certain areas of security. What are you guys using? And is there a way that we can bring that data together? Or just the whole team using Torii as one tool kind of in your tool belt. So
Yeah, absolutely. All right, so now we're gonna jump in. I'm actually gonna open up the demo environment. But before we go on, I'm wondering if we can get in the chat. We've got two directions we can go in terms of which kind of workflow we're gonna dive into first. We can go over the process of a new app discovery, or we can look at what do you do with kind of that backlog of existing applications where the whether or not AI is known about it. So I'm wondering if people in the chat, would you prefer to look at new app or existing? We'll give people a minute to kind of give that feedback, and that'll determine which one we really want to dive into with this discussion. All right, seeing vote for existing, new. All right, let's go with the existing applications. Both? That's a good idea. We will do both, but I was just wondering which one people were more anxious to see first. All right, let's jump. We'll check out the existing application. And this one, I can speak to it as a recipient in this process, so to speak. So I, at Torii, work on the marketing team. I'm also a bit of an AI nerd. I love testing out new tools. And so I've become the kind of application owner for a ton of these. And so, yeah, so I'm able to see what's kind of happening as we engage with these vendors. And so with this, we've kind of got these core pieces where if the AI status is unknown, we're checking out whether or not there's the app owner, whether that person is in place in the system. And then based on that, takes it in different directions. And the key thing here is that it's all about prioritization with your team. You've got a limited amount of time, a limited amount of bandwidth. And so having a way to kind of sift through and figure out which ones you need to prioritize, that's really key. So I'm going to open up now. Well, first I'm going to start over, give a little background on this with, if we see the, we're looking at the dashboard here. Oh, so this is a recent feature release. For those of you who are existing customers, you can start getting access to these dashboards through Torii Labs. But I want to jump over here to the applications page. And you can see here from the discovery perspective that Torii is doing continuous discovery, multiple sources that it's bringing in, and it gives you a really clean perspective of all the apps in your ecosystem. It's also on the back end, it's looking at things like different instances. We have this application record where it's looking at different instances of different apps. If there are personal applications that are not business related, Tori's kind of hiding that stuff in the background, so you can still see that record. But when you go over to this review page, you're getting all signal, no noise, a really focused view on the apps that matter the most. And that's really important with all these apps because when we're talking about like that centralized record, this is where it's all about taking advantage of those details. So with this, what we have with this workflow, this is very similar to the one that we recently instituted here at Torii. And it all starts with this trigger up here. And so what we're using for our trigger is a custom field that we've put into our applications about whether or not generative AI is available. And this workflow is kicked off if this custom field is not set. Now, you're able to set these custom fields simply by going down to settings, application details, and then you have the ability to add a new field. And when you do that, one of the ones you can add to those custom details is about, like we said, about generative AI. And so if we look in here in Okta, for example, I jump over to the info, and you can see right here, this generative AI. Currently, it's not set, so maybe I'll set it over to yes. And so in this case, this one is set. So it would not be part of this workflow that's getting kicked off. But for ones where it's not set, it's going to kick off. And then this first branch that we're using within Torii is we want to delegate as much as we can to the people who are using these applications. So in this case, if there is a primary owner who's already set for this application, it's going to give this task is essentially going to be delegated over to the application owner. And so the first thing it's going to do is it's going to send out this Slack message, and it's going to send it to the primary app owner, and it's going to simply say, does this app use a generative AI feature? And it's up to you in terms of what kind of responses you want people to be able to offer back. What we did at Torii is rather than say no for this initial review, we had them either say yes or unsure. And in both instances, it would update the application field that I showed you earlier. So if they said yes, it would update it to say yes, and then it would kick off the process. Similarly, if they were not sure, it would switch that value in that field to unsure. And then in both of these instances, it's sending them out this Slack message. And it's essentially telling them to copy the below email and send that out to the vendor and to, CC in our security team as well as privacy. Now, I'll give you this is a simplified version of what that email is looking for. So when we're sending this email out to the vendor, what we're looking for is we want to know, do you provide AI capabilities in your product? How is that solution integrated and maintained? And for some of these, there were, secondary questions around, is this done by a third party? Do other people have access to this AI solution or this model? Do you use external AI engines or models in your product? And asking more specifically which models are in there. Are you using, an off-the-shelf LLM? Is it ChatGPT API, or is this, something of your own? Will this data be used to train the data set or model, either by you or by a third party? Does your product offer an opt-out feature? And how do you ensure the security and privacy of our data? So you can see here, what we're doing with these is that we're sending out these messages, and what we really want to know is where, if there is AI, what kind of AI are we dealing with? Is this your, something you got off the shelf, API driven? Or is it your own custom model that you're trying to train with? And we want to understand who all has access to this. And so we have an amazing legal team here who they're monitoring these responses as well as part of a data mapping initiative. So that we want to understand not just which tools have access, but where are those tools pulling in AI resources from? Is this a situation where, we have sub-processors, maybe in other jurisdictions or countries, who have access to this data as well? So your mileage may vary in terms of what email you actually want to put together and send out. But this is the one that we opted for here at Torii. And so anyway, the user, the primary app owner, they would get access, they would get a copy of this email. They'd be encouraged to send it out to the vendor, and simultaneously would also create a ticket within a ticketing service for whether it was a yes or an unsure. And then through that process, we are able to whittle down and figure out, in terms of these tools, which ones were using generative AI, what the extent of that was, and so forth. Now, for a lot of organizations, maybe don't have that primary app owner set. And so there are other ways that you can go about figuring out which ones to prioritize, which ones to go after. One example that I like, and I didn't fully build out these branches of this, but was to look at based on tagging. So what we do at Torii is that we have tags for these different applications, and we do have a series of tags relating to AI development, AI generated content, et cetera, et cetera. And so, while it's obviously not going to catch every instance of AI. It can be a great way to get started where you can immediately identify those tools that have a very prominent use of AI at the forefront. And so I set up a couple of different filters. You can have one where it's, if it's an AI type of tool. You can also have another one where it's looking at things like, is this app GDPR compliant? Is this ISO 27,000? Is it SOC 2 compliant? And that can be another way for you to figure out which of these apps maybe represent a little bit more of a risk. Now, I know I've talked for a bit there. Rachel, I'm wondering, do you have any thoughts as it relates to this, or how people should be thinking about getting their arms around their existing applications?
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting use case because typically we in Torii are serving kind of when we discover a new app, we're serving the user who, logged into the app for the first time. But I think what this shows is how extendable Torii is, right? You can use Torii to even send that email to your vendor contact, if you have that vendor contact info in Torii itself. So there's lots of different ways that we can, again, automate certain parts of these processes, and then also extend Torii to do some of that work for you on your behalf. So I really love this example, and hopefully to see some of it implemented for some of my customers. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And just another thing I wanted to call out is, as we're talking about, centralizing data, maintaining records, a tool like Torii also does make that a lot easier, where you can view instances where this workflow has been run in the past. And you have that audit log, and you can see kind of the historical side of all these actions. So now we're going to transition over. We're going to talk about the new app discovered workflow. And this one is something that we've been doing at Torii for ever since I first joined the company. And the questions that we ask in this process have evolved over time. But the big point is that when a new app is initially detected within the ecosystem, Torii is spotting it immediately. And the very first thing you want to do is figure out what the heck is this thing? And so what we do here at Torii is whenever there's this new app discovery, it immediately sends a Slack notification. You can either send it to the individual who's in charge of InfoSec or security or IT, or you can send it as a notification in a channel. One thing I personally like to see is getting as much surface level data as possible in that initial Slack message. So the very first thing, the way I have it set up here is that with this Slack message, it's telling them, here's the app. Is it GDPR compliant, SOC 2 compliant, ISO 27000 series compliant? And here are the associated tags. So even if the whoever is receiving this notification, even if they don't actually know the app, they can see right away, is this more of a generally more trustworthy? Maybe it's been in the industry for a little longer versus kind of a newer one with less of that regulatory rigor associated with it. And the next thing we want to do is send out a form, and that form goes to whoever was the one to sign up for this application. Often it's detected when they use their corporate email to sign up. So we just like to send them an email right away, or it can be a message that just says, "Hey, we noticed you signed up for an app. Could you just answer a couple of questions for us real quick?" And this is important to do right away. And so the things that we're looking for, and obviously you can ask different questions based on what you care most about. But we like to know things like, I'll just open up the preview form, asking things around, what's your current usage? Are you evaluating? Are you planning on using this? Do you have comments? What's the purpose of this application? Who should the owner be? And this is a big one for our discussion today, is around, are you going to upload any personal identifying information? And are you planning on integrating that tool with any of our existing systems? So I think those questions in particular, they're really important because it gives you a great way to quickly figure out how high of a priority should this be. Now, based on the responses that they offer in that form, it's going to actually split out into these different branches. And the way I have it set up here is that the kind of the high priority is anything where they say, we're planning on using personal identifying information. That could be customer data, that could be employee data. Those are the ones that you want to spot immediately and make sure that they don't, aggressively give it access to data that you don't want them to have. And so there's a couple different ways you can go about this. One is that I like to just send a Slack notification to them and just says, hey, this has been identified as a high risk application. Please refrain from use until it has completed a security review. And they'll be getting this notification right after they fill out that form. And so it gives you the opportunity, once you see that intent, to do a more thorough process of investigation. It's also sending out that Slack notification to the initial recipient, whether that be IT or InfoSec, and just says, hey, this one's been identified as high risk. Please complete this review right away. Now, and another thing is you can also change the state immediately. So in this case, put that into a security assessment because there's going to be personal data associated with it. Simultaneously, maybe it's one where there's no personal information, but you're looking out for those AI tools. One way you can go about doing that is, again, using Tori's tags. And again, this is not going to catch every instance. Maybe what you would decide is a better route is you would look for, ask them a question about the generative AI during that initial sign-up phase. That can give you another way to see into how you want to react to that. But if nothing else, we do have these tags available so you can look for if application has any of those tags. Then it kind of goes into this next tier where it's a medium priority, where there's not personal information uploaded, but it is an AI tool. So you want to give it a once over. In this case, maybe you change that status to an evaluation. And then you might have other apps where, it's up to you whether you decide you have the time to look at every single app as it comes in, or if other ones kind of go onto the back burner for a period. That's up to you and up to your discretion in your organization. But Rachel, I'm wondering, I know you deal with a lot of different companies working on these kind of app onboarding workflows. Do you have any thoughts about this or what customers should think about?
Yeah, so I think what's great about Torii and the tags that you mentioned is that those are going to speak to the specific feature sets of every application that's discovered by Torii. So as you know, and again, if we're really trying to harness or get our arms around the AI component of it, we can utilize those tags to get very granular and to send, the right information or the right notification to the right teams based off of the different feature sets, i.e. those tags that we have in Torii. Another thing that I like to do is, sometimes when maybe we're not exactly sure what teams want to do with the information that we're giving them or that we have, but we know that we need to start creating that information for folks to work off of, we can actually, within Torii, save basically views to show those specific applications on your application page. So you could have a view that says, tag is, includes AI, and then you have that view saved. So that way, anytime a new app is discovered with one of those tags, it adds to the list here. And so this becomes a dynamic list that is going to grow and build as, all of these new apps are being discovered. And so then it gives you that kind of working list, if you will, to start working off of in terms of those security assessments you're looking to do for these apps. And the last thing I'll mention is I know we're talking about AI here, and that's obviously a big topic of conversation for everyone right now, but this goes for really any type of feature set. It could be a VPN tool. It could be, insert kind of feature here. You could do this similar process, have this dynamic list growing as new tools are discovered. And then again, bringing those teams together and having that centralized area of data for you guys to review.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of as you're talking about that, I pulled up on this applications page. You can create those custom views. And I actually went and made one just for AI apps. And I specifically included things around like the SOC 2 and the GDPR checks as well. And so it's about, what you said, it's about figuring out how do you bring these teams into the conversation. Not every team is ready for you to just say, hey, here's Torii, check it out. It can do amazing things. Go. But if you say, here's a window into apps that you care about with the priorities that matter to you, that's a much easier way to kind of introduce them into what's happening instead of them feeling like you're just trying to, push work on them. It's a great way to kind of introduce them to that. Yeah. Um, all right. So I think in terms of looking at all the things you can do within Torii, there's a lot more there. I think big thing is that it's about there's building blocks here, right? How you use them is kind of up to you. And you can get creative, especially with those custom details around applications, how you want to go about creating these different branches, specifically for prioritization. So you can figure out what things you really need to focus on and what things are maybe a little bit more secondary. And I just want to kind of wrap it up. We've got a couple of closing thoughts, and then we'll move over to kind of questions and answers. But so closing thoughts. One, this is a kind of it's a quote sort of by Voltaire, but this idea that perfect is the enemy of good. And this doesn't really this applies to everything, right? At the end of the day, if you're always waiting for perfect or best, it's going to get in the way. And the reality is there's just not time for that. We need to be aggressively tackling these things because they're only going to get more significant as time goes on. We talked about that acceleration of app adoption. It's just going now. And so the practices and the policies that you institute today are going to make a big difference with compounding benefits in the long run. The other thing I want to reiterate is your company culture really matters. If you kind of have more of a lockdown focus on this, it's going to mean that you take different steps than an organization that's a little bit more open. And so figuring out how do you target which applications, which ones become high priority, that's really up to your discretion, but it's something that you should be thinking about and try to do intentionally. And the last one is just reiteration, you're still very early in this. As overwhelming as all of this AI stuff can feel sometimes, this really is just the beginning. And a lot of these AI tools are still kind of following a lot of the models of traditional applications. A lot of them are just SaaS plus AI. More iterations are going to happen in the future when we start talking about AI agents or other things down the road that we don't even really understand yet. So it's important to start to engage with these things now and not wait until it gets even tougher in the future. So that's it in terms of the structured part of the webinar. Now, Rachel, I'm wondering, you have some of those questions up. I'm
Yeah.
wondering if there are any of those that kind of jump out that you want to address. And I will reiterate what you said earlier. If you have questions specifically related to like, how do I do this thing in my instance of Torii, your CSM is the person that you should really be talking to, and they can help you and they can definitely do better with their intimate knowledge of your situation than Rachel or I could, unless Rachel is that CSM. But yeah, sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead, Rachel.
Good, good. Cool. No, so we do have a great question. So the question is around the application categories that we have in Torii. So it is, there is an applications category chart on the insights page showing with categories like operations, sales, and marketing. Those must be based on known information of the apps in use. Will AI or AI enabled become a category? And I can actually take this one. So I think there's a couple of things here in terms of AI and those categories. So one quick thing to mention is we actually just made a release for our enterprise customers that you can now customize those categories to give you a little bit more control and granularity of kind of what apps fall under what category. So that's number one. That has big implications on the insights page, on the app catalog, a lot of different areas in Torii. So something to definitely dig into. But as far as the AI piece is concerned, I definitely think that's a great call out and something that I'll take back to our product team. But I think what you can use in this instance is, again, those tags to identify, okay, does this app have any type of AI feature? Thus meaning that if yes, then it is an AI-enabled app. If no, or unsure, then we can create those custom application details as John did in his demo, and then use those tags to allow us to identify if the app is AI enabled. John, anything you want to add on there? I hope that was clear.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I would say, in regards to this question, that it's a little bit tricky. And so, going through this benchmarks report in terms of how do you categorize apps, even figuring out with productivity, operations, sales, that gets kind of messy. The tools, these are not mutually exclusive categories. And so we use them as a ways to kind of approximating the primary use. The issue is that AI is not really a use. It's more of a mechanism, right? I think the reality is just we should assume that virtually every app in the future is going to have AI to some extent, whether or not it's generative or not. And so, whereas every productivity app will probably have, AI to some degree. And so it becomes a little bit difficult with that, where we don't want to have just one category that is AI and it's just every app. And so we try to have those categories as, that primary category. If you think about this, um, I'm sorry, you want to get nerdy on this, but if you think about it taxonomically, you're operating with structures where you, as much as possible, you want there to be cleanly delineated lines of distinction. And that's really hard when you're operating with AI. So, it's something that we're always trying to figure out the best way to represent this data. And it is something that we are thinking about actively. But those are some of the reasons why it has been maybe a little bit more difficult to institute that.
I think I'll
Um,
just piggyback off of that as well. One of the other things that I've seen kind of out in the field that I have some customers doing is, starting with these AI conversations, at the time of purchase, if you will, of an app, or at a renewal, your next upcoming renewal. And really going to those vendors and getting these questions in front of them. So that way you can use that data in Torii. And if you are, using one of our let's say a contract management integration, and you have, let's say, some type of AI component field or AI enabled field in that contract management system, we can pull that field from that and sync that in Torii with your contract. So that way we know, okay, for based off of your managed applications and those applications that you are using organizationally, whether they have those AI components, and bringing all that data in Torii, again, kind of thinking about that centralization of data. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
ooh,
All right. I think we're actually right up against time. But for any other questions that are in that chat, we'll reach out to individuals directly, either someone from the Torii team or the CSM directly responsible for the account. But I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you to everyone who has took some time to spend it with us this afternoon. Thank you so much, Rachel, for bailing me out in this discussion today. It was a pleasure to have you on board. So,
thank you guys.
take care.